Just fill up the chair so with everybody's together. I said, please.
Okay, while they're moving, I'm going to check another audio thing, but they can hear you.
How do they hear me? Through their computers or through what? Those in the very back, I see little heads back. They just move forward. What does it take to move forward? It's probably downhill. Can't do it. It's just something that, you know, I don't spit through a computer, so if you sit close, you're not going to get wet. All right. Obviously, if I was there, I'd be more powerful. Because I just wouldn't start.
I think we're working.
Well, I can hardly hear you.
How about now?
Much better. Now, can the class hear me? Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate very much his introduction, and I learned some things, and his vocabulary is really quite good for a young person. Even the words he pronounces wrong, it's Aigues-Mortes is the name of that city in France. Which is right in the section, in the sort of marshy section of southern France that there's a lot of cowboys still there, all the way down there. And not too far from Carcassonne, very interesting part, and a fairly well-preserved medieval city, probably made a little bit more preserved by Viollet-le-Duc, the architect in late 19th century France, who redid Carcassonne and also redid Notre Dame in Paris. So Notre Dame in Paris was quite redone by Viollet-le-Duc at the end of the 19th century. It didn't really look quite that way. Anyway, so all those things, I can give you spout facts like that forever because I have a terrific memory. But now here's the interesting thing. There's a fundamental difference between a great memory and memorize. If you give me 2 lines of poetry, I can't memorize it. I don't have ability. I could never be in a school play, grammar school, junior high school, ever. I can't memorize a poem. I can't memorize anything. But I have a good memory, an overall memory for things, and I can see patterns. But every time they're just slightly different. One of the fundamental things that you didn't grasp, you jump around this. I've never had this conversation with you, Dan. But you jump around the corners of a fundamental aspiration, which most of you don't want to do and can't do. You talk about terror and confidence, and you flip that out like that's something you can decide to do, or you talk about wanting to do things I don't know how to do and the dumbness and all that stuff. That's a story, sure, and that's true, and it's true about me. However, there's nothing necessarily and fundamentally good about that. There's nothing pedagogically good about that. I mean, you can live a perfectly okay life doing a series of tasks for people. It's just something I abhor. There's nothing romantically wonderful about it. I mean, I do things and think up things on myself because I'm unemployable. I've been fired from every job. Well, if you can't hold a job, if you can't do what people ask you to do, if you can't do, then you have to find how you can survive. So I got backed into what I'm doing. It's not because I am clever or romantically, or I'm the great artist going to pursue against the wind and march against the enemy. It's not that at all. This is we live a sort of a choiceless world. We got what we got. We're given what we're given. I'm given this sort of abrasive personality and given a curiosity. And so because I can't do anything else, I either would sit and be homeless on the street or something that bad, actually. I was destitute at 45. None of you are 45. I had nothing because I couldn't hold a job. I couldn't work with clients. Well, I guess I could. I couldn't bear it. It wasn't in my constitution, but I'm not advocating that. I am envious of people. I'm envious of everybody. I'm envious of anybody who can do something. And each of you, because some things I did, some other people liked or figured out they couldn't do, then I'm talking to you instead of you talking to me right now. But it's not necessarily a sociological ideal. I've had a really interesting life. I mean, I am astonished how interesting it's been. I am, thank goodness, I know that's a contraction for God, so I'm not thanking God, but thank you, something that allowed me to have an interesting life. Because the opposite of interesting to me is a jail cell. When I see a picture of somebody in jail, even in these cops movies that come on, you know, a 1 hour film a week, when they go to the jail scenes, I can't bear it. I have to get up and get out of the room. I just can't handle emotionally that idea of being in a place that's so uninteresting, so restrained. And it's not just the, you know, like the walls will be caving in on me. It's just, how could you do so? How could you have a day that was so uninteresting where you couldn't pursue what you wanted to pursue? Why would you want to think for more than 5-10 minutes without connecting something you thought about to something else? Why wouldn't you do that? I can't imagine not doing that. What is that noise?
I think that's you.
It is not me, and I don't have gas. Was not me. Anyway, we'll go ahead. But I can't imagine the lack of freedom what lack of freedom to pursue ideas and thoughts. And you don't want to watch television with me. Well, there's something wrong with this thing. Technology, that's what we always say. When I watch television, I constantly change the channel from one thing to another. I flip from a science program, turn off the ad, go to a sport thing, go to something else. I try to take it all in. I'd like to watch 4 or 5 things at once. I would find that interesting. Oh, stop that. Fix that, will you, Dan?
I'm trying.
I've done these talks and they haven't been so, you know, last time we talked, it just worked, didn't it? Okay. Now you all got, you know, some people were muttering about, I was listening in, I was being rude. I couldn't tell you I was there because it wasn't open for me to do that. I would have said, I'm listening to you, but I decided it was curious and I was listening to me. It's like putting you up your ear to your kids talking and they behind the door.
I just received a tech support tip that may solve all of our problems.
It didn't solve interrupting my sentence.
Does anybody know how I can turn the microphone off?
You won't be able to talk to them.
Oh, jeez.
Does it matter? I was talking?
Just continue, and I'll turn off this other thing that's feeding back.
Okay. Tell me where I was, somebody, before I was rudely interrupted.
You were listening in.
Oh, I was listening and you were talking about, well, he just says he's dumb. Maybe he isn't dumb. He seems smart. And that's just a device. And I wasn't supported by Dan either. You know, Dan was saying, well, that's what he says, you know, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, that's kind of his shtick. That was the implication that I was play acting. I know I'm not dumb next to somebody who's really stupid. I'm talking about dumb next to so many people I deal with who have skills. Oh, he says he can't type. Why does he say that? You know, all that stuff. Well, because I think that's fundamental in our society to have skills. But let's just think how typing would fuck me up. I just did a book. Have you ever brought that book in, Dan, the big fat one, my new one?
I have the excerpt that you gave away at the Esri conference here.
No, the whole book.
They're reading the Lou Kahn chapter for next week, and I'm taking it.
You're not going to answer my question, are you?
It's 7 pounds, Richard. I didn't bring it this time.
Okay, that's the answer to the question. You see the difference? I asked him a question. He could have just said, no, I didn't bring it.
Yeah.
And I didn't bring it because I didn't want to carry 7 pounds. Carrying 7 pounds is a bullshit thing for a professor to whine about, right?
Agreed.
However, he could have just said, I didn't bring it. You see all the unnecessary stuff he said? I would not say that unnecessary stuff. I just couldn't bear saying that unnecessary thing. I wouldn't whine about the reasons. He'll stop doing that in a while because he'll grow up. And he'll find it isn't necessary to wallow around in all those explanations. 80% of questions can be answered by yes or no.
Yes.
Thank you, Dan.
I'll steal one of your jokes and remind the class that half of them are below average as well.
That's correct. That's a statistic. In this classroom, if this classroom is our world, half of you are below average in anything. Because statistically, you would just, that's the way it works. Intelligence, height, weight, age, whatever you saw the average age, average intelligence based on some intelligence test that we know is inferior. You're all, half of you are below average. 10% of you are in the bottom 10%. That's just the way it is. That's what statistics are. You see how foolish statistics are, right?
Was there anything
Everything is foolish. Everything can be looked at. Every fundamental thing you know, you can look at and see the absurdity of it. I just took about as simple a part of our life just then. I mean, we hear these statistics all the time. We see them in the newspapers. You realize you can ask a couple questions of them and just throw them away because they're not based on anything. There's 2 or 3 other parameters that make them meaningful, but they're never given. And we accept all this stuff that people say. Of course, coming into the room and when you leave, you're going to say, gee, how is that? How you doing? How you feeling? Anything new with you? I mean, you ask questions of people that are insulting because they can't be answered. And because they can't be answered, you're insulting them because you're saying to them, I don't care about you. And that are most of your questions. He brought up bad questions and speeches, which is what most of you would have if you asked. You'd get up and you'd give, somebody there would want to make points with Dan or with some girlfriend, boyfriend, or themselves and their own ego, and ask me a question which is really a speech about themselves, or they'd ask me a lousy question about me, about myself. And that's when we take questions and answers. We get those 2 varieties. Every once in a while, somebody asks a question. That's okay. But it's so rare because we're never, boy, if you had a choice of taking a class and the class was understanding the structure of a good question, of different kinds of questions in context, of the various kinds of questions you can ask, how to elicit an answer, how to find a path or numerous alternative paths from asking a question that leads there, how to ask a question that's structured that it comes up with something more than the person knew who answers it, how to understand the patterns that could come from a question. Wow, that would be a good semester, wouldn't it? But that's not even touched upon. You have never been asked that. You go your whole home life is your parents saying, would you quit asking why? Would you quit asking questions? Just, you're discouraged from asking questions that would get, why is a terrific question, by the way. You're discouraged from that. And it's not about the answer, it's about the question.
Do you think part of the reason that we can't have that course on how to ask questions is because of disciplinary divisions in the university itself?
Oh, you can go back further than that. I mean, yes, the answer to that is yes, but it's also the people who make up the curriculum, and you go before that, it's the people who are teachers, and you go before that, it's where they're taught how to be a teacher, and then you go back before that, it's the accreditation of the university that teaches teachers to be teachers. It's before that, it's the people who decide they want to be a teacher. That's probably the worst people to teach. I mean, anybody who wants to teach has some missing gonad in their head. And what you have to pass, I mean, the things I had to pass to be an architect were nothing I used to be an architect. I've never taken a course that I can look back on that's helped me with anything I've done in the past 60 years. You know?
Why did you take so many courses at Penn?
Okay, that's a complicated question. It's not a bad question. They don't know the whole story. So I can make a diversion here for a part of it, but it's not a bad question. Basically, what I'm talking about is every single course I took that was the courses I had to take in order to be an architect.
Okay.
Trigonometry, solid trig, every course that I took that I had to take to become an A student at Penn were not anything I used in the rest of my life. But I certainly think I used a course in Inter-Asian ethnology and technology, and I used a course in the making of a Japanese sword and inside painted snuff bottles. That was actually revelatory, the fact that we studied the Japanese ones and they came from China. And almost everything in Japan came from China and got redefined and refined by the Japanese. Whole big patterns of how people changed each other. So there's courses in Alaskan archaeology that I found interesting. And there was courses, very obtuse courses that were interesting to me, of seeing that in anything is everything. In the minutia of life is everything. That keeps on expanding. It is all the things in Hirosuke's, as I'm pronouncing, I think wrong, the wave, the great wave, where you see the geometry repeating and repeating at every scale. Fractals.
Yep.
Our learning is also fractal. It's not taught that. Fractals are only taught visually and mathematically, but it's actually in the patterns of how we think and study and learn about repetitive patterns in history and patterns in architecture, space, and in information. So part of what you also didn't say is that everybody knows, or most of the people know, because you've told them all ad nauseum, that I've done a lot of stuff in my life. And often I'm asked, well, how do you get all that done? How do you get all those books done if you don't have family money? I don't have family money. I told you I was destitute at 45. I never had a windfall profit. Dan, do I live well?
You live awfully well, Richard.
Okay. I live luxuriantly, and there's nothing that I was given to me, and I didn't work for it. It's an accident. But people say, well, who's your patron? How do you get all this done? How do you do it? Well, I don't have a publisher. I don't have a publicist. I don't have a second in command. I don't advertise. I self-publish. I beg. I get things done, and my secret is that I want to do it so badly. Now, you never get taught that in school. You never learn that in school, because you can't be taught that and learn that. You either feel it or you don't feel it. And there's nothing wrong with not feeling it. So don't compare yourself to somebody who you wouldn't want to fight in front of in a war. I'm so frightened. I'm a flawed person. I'm so frightened of not being curious and thinking of something that's more interesting than what I just did. That's what drives me. That's my patron. I want to do it so bad. I have no reason, really no reason at this moment of my life, going to be 83 in March, that I'm starting on a 2-year project, which Dan didn't even explain well.
Would you explain it to us, please?
Well, it's very difficult to explain. I will try to explain in a minute, but I don't explain it well. I can't even explain it well. I know there's something there. That's the terror of it. The terror is I can't explain it well. I don't know how to do it. I believe there's something there. I believe there's something there with the 555 thing that he explained to you. I thought that was a terrific idea. I thought that would be the great conference of my life. I couldn't put it together, but it's a really good idea. Somebody can put it together. It's not copywritten. It's out there. I've sent that poster around to people. They can do it. Everybody can steal if they want. It doesn't make any difference to me. You know, if somebody takes your idea, only two things can happen. They can do it better or worse. That's the only two things they can do. Let's say they do it worse. Well, you laugh at them. Let's say they do it better. You learn something from the fact that they could get it done and they did it better. There's no downside from somebody stealing from you. There's no reason to protect ideas if you have the confidence of thinking up another one.
See, I have a hard time letting go of terror and confidence as something that would be useful to us, even though we're not you.
Well, fine, good, do it. You should do what you want to do.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not telling anybody. You know, I don't teach anymore. And
the last
thing I want to do is walk down the street and turn around quickly and see anybody but you behind me.
Thank you, Richard. I'll be there, but
Because I don't want any, I'm not trying to have a line of ants behind me.
well, that was the first question that I asked you.
What I'm doing better than anybody else that I know.
Yeah. Well, that was the first question that I asked you, and you told me that it wasn't a speech or a bad question, which was in 1976 when you had this conference, all of the architects in the country in one place to do one thing. Were you looking for other people to do what you were thinking about and talking about? And you said no, and I didn't believe you then, but I believe you now.
Okay. No, I'm never looking for anybody in that way. There are some people who, like yourself, and there's probably who regularly communicate with me, and you know some of them just from looking at Facebook. There are people who get it. I think it's an interesting path to take. People think it's an interesting path. And there's probably a few dozen, maybe 50 people around the world. But that's all. It's fine. I am not looking for the 51st.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any difference.
I'm actually curious, extending on what you just said about around the world. You get around a lot. In the last 6 months, you were in Norway, you were in Colombia. Did you see in the world that is not the United States more or better sense of clear, understandable information than what we have here?
No.
Was there an app on your phone or a digital product or service or a printed guide or anything that you used in the last 6 months traveling that was good information architecture?
No. Nobody has done the re-realized version of what my access guides were for travel, which you could bring into the 21st century now and have a hybrid form of paper and electronic paper that would really be useful when you travel. There's nothing that really works. And most people in this room, for very good reasons, think paper's dead. And since paper's dead, all the effort goes into electronic versions of everything because it allows you to do things you can't do on paper, except make some things understandable and make them in a form that you'd like to walk around the city with. Most travel is people going to cities. There's a little bit of travel where you go see the fjords and a waterfall and a lake. And there's certainly some travel where you ski or you swim. But the preponderance of travel is going to some place or another, even if it's Disney World, where you're walking around someplace and going to things. You're walking around Paris, Venice, New York, Tokyo, Beijing. That dominates most of our things. And seeing a piece of bling architecture or a church or something here or there. There's no doubt. But I think that dominates things. Or let's say it's one of the three things you do. That one thing, you can't, I find it difficult, and I make I know how illiterate I am, technically illiterate, but I know I don't want to walk around the city with something, in front of me, an iPod or something in front of me looking at this map and doing that, looking up and looking there and looking here and seeing myself. Well, I think those maps are wonderful to see where you are. But then I would love to have the ability to have a piece of paper that on my screen before I left, I could say, well, here's a map, and oh, I'm going to stay at that hotel. I punch the screen, or I do an arrow and punch it, whatever you do with your screens. And immediately, a 20-minute walk from that place gets printed out in different colors of what's the other hotels, what are the museums, how far it is. 20 minutes, as you know, is a mile if you walk briskly. You can do it in kilometers. You can change that. It doesn't have to be 20 minutes. That's just what I chose. And you could have everything you could see in a 20-minute walk, this way, that way, what the restaurants are, and a write-up on it. Then you could touch that and push a dot and have that printed up. A combination of electronic paper, because that would be created electronically, and you could walk around with it and sit down when you're having lunch without your nose in an iPhone and having it go off and slip off the screen and do all the things that happen when you say, oh, fuck, I lost it. There are things where your next generation, maybe not you people, will start realizing that there are things that allow us electronically to meld electronically as a hybrid with paper, and paper with something else, and electronics with something else, with a three-dimensional fly-through of information and understanding that would meld those things together instead of everybody going down their little path of doing each thing better. Innovation, I have a little formula like Latch was a formula for the 5 ways of organizing information. What he alluded to but didn't really tell you, when I give a lecture and I bring up Latch, I say, I just thought up those 5 ways. He sort of said that. It's not scientific. He didn't use that sentence. If somebody thinks up a 6th, I'll say in my next speech, there are 6 ways of organizing information. There's nothing, I don't have pride of authorship of anything. I just have the pride that comes from figuring out something next. Innovation, I realized that everybody was talking about innovation. There was innovation universities, innovation classes, companies had innovation in their sign. You drive into San Francisco, they call it the innovation city. All the car ads have innovation. You just listen to the stupid words that they repeat over and over again in ads for cars or anything like that. It's innovative. Well, everything is innovative, or else, it's innovative. So I just thought there's 5 ways of innovating things, and I thought up an acronym, not Latch, but it's called a NOSE. That I won't go into it, but there's only 5 ways. And much of the stuff that we innovate is just collecting things. I mean, the iPhone, Apple didn't invent the iPhone. It's about 400 different inventors where they put it all together. They added everything together. Much of the breakthrough of the TED conference, some people there know I created the TED conference. Much of what happened in the TED conference is I subtracted things. I took away white men in suits. I took away the lectern so you couldn't read a speech. I took away saving seats, so it wasn't them and us. Saving seats for speakers, so there was always, the front row was saved for things. I took away long speeches. I took away the fact that it was on one teeny specialty. Everything was about finances, it would be about bond issues. If it was on medicine, it would be eye, ear, nose, and throat specialists. If it was on architects, it was just architecture. So I took away that and let it open to everything. Technology, entertainment, design, everything in between. I took away the long speech. I took away things that bored the hell out of me, to have it something that I'd like to go to. It was subtraction, not innovation. I just subtracted things. I put lines, red lines through everything that made up a conference. People, when they invent things, everybody goes gaga of the innovative thing of the Tesla. Tesla's an electric car. When I grew up, all the magazines from Curtis Publishing, which was Saturday Evening Post, some of the best-selling magazines in the world were delivered by electric trucks. We've had some of the first automobiles were electric. There's nothing innovative about an electric car. You know, it's still a car. And you know what a car is? It's a wagon. The car was a wagon. They put a steam or an electric motor on. That wasn't a great invention. And the wheels were the same width apart as the railroad tracks, that somebody made up the width of a railroad track. And that's why so 2 horses could pull a wagon down some rails for trolleys. I mean, where's this innovation? Nobody has questioned what motion is, getting from point A to B. I mean, Star Trek, Beam Me Up, Scotty, was an innovation, but nobody's really innovated how we get from point A to B. Or whether maybe it should be a matter of zoning where you work instead of the roads clog going both ways. Maybe zoning should be changed that you could build buildings as tall as you want, as long as you give over the top 10% of the building to schools. So you have no bond issues, so the city isn't in debt with bond issues for spaces that they don't need to build, but the developers can build them because you can give them more space to build. Maybe you can do some things with zoning. That's innovation. Not being bling architecture so you see if it comes to a point at top, or 4 points, or 5 points, or it zigzags, or it turns. That's innovation? That's not innovation. That's the Bjorky school of innovation, where you just try to do something new because they haven't seen it before. Like Zaha Hadid, you just do something that's really quite ugly, but nobody did it before. Architecture is making of space. When you go to a city, why do you like some cities? Well, because it's interesting to walk through them. When you walk through 90% of the cities, the wonderful cities in Europe, or even New York City, you walk down Madison Avenue, you walk down Fifth Avenue, it's interesting. You look in the shops, it's interesting. You can't tell me what it looks above the 4th floor. You can tell me what the city looks like from 5 miles away, the skyline, but you don't know what street those buildings come down on from 5 miles away. That has a picture of a skyline. And you see all the bling buildings going up high or short. Oh, that's Empire State Building. That's it. But what's on the ground floor? If you walk past the ground floor of Empire State Building, you don't know you're walking past the Empire State Building. Cities are interesting because the ground floor is interesting. Nobody walks down Park Avenue in New York. If you've been to New York City, it's a great wide street, widest street in New York, just about. I think the widest street, except for some pieces of Broadway. Has divided in the middle with trees and everything. It's that wide because all the train tracks are under it. That's why it's that wide. It's not that wide because they need to make it that wide, or a great avenue. It's that wide because there is train tracks under it. And it's boring. So you go to 3rd Avenue, Lexington, Madison. You don't walk down Park Avenue. All the buildings they try to set them back from the street. The great building, the Seagram's building, is back about 200 feet. So you're a very wealthy man going to a very wealthy meeting in your very wealthy car with your very wealthy chauffeur, and it's raining. You get drenched going to the front door of the building. Stupid. You want to get your car in the snow. You're 200 feet from the street. And if you got up to the building, it's not interesting to look in the ground floor. It's just glass.
It strikes me that a lot of what you're talking about has to do with our bodies in space. That part of why we don't like to walk on Park Avenue is that huge setback makes us feel funny.
Well, it's not interesting. Learning is remembering what you're interested in. It's not a learning experience. It's not an information experience. It's not an information architectural experience. It's not an experience that you feel good, that you can pause and look in a window. It's not an experience where you can see why and what they do, where they do it. There's not restaurants. There's not a place to walk in from there to get coffee, to get warm. There's not an overhang. It's the 2nd floor and above. You are allowed to go up. So maybe the buildings are a little closer together. But if you did it on the south and west sides of the street, they would give you shade. You would have a way of walking through the whole city when it was raining. It would be lit from the above, and you'd have an arcade through the whole city like Bologna very successfully did 400 years ago and still is there. 33 miles of arcades. and you would have more space for a developer to build. You can go about every problem from a different area, not from looking to, have you heard one thing I've said which was about aesthetics? No. It was about performance. And the performance of Bologna, the performance of interest on the ground floor, the performance of using a city, the performance of being interested in things and learning from what you see, that's worthy of design. That's worthy of the designer.
I want to take that back to my previous question about embodiment, and that performances only take place when we are active in our bodies, or primarily that's what's going on. And
Well,
trying
you're in this little journey of one of the paths of Muriel Cooper of flying through information.
Yes.
Well, which is a term I invented.
Well, I'd love to remind
And that's
you.
but that's one part of it. And yes, it's about being in space with information. I think buildings are information. It's the space, the thoughtful making of space. I added place to that, but the thoughtful making of space is a Luke Kahn phrase. Thoughtful is learning. Thoughtful is information. The thoughtful information learning part of the fifth dimension with time, or is it the fourth dimension? I get lost. Anyway, time, because you go through a building, I guess it's the fourth dimension, that you learn and you understand where you're at. I mean, I go to an airport, I always get lost. And it has nothing to do with signage. I mean, it has something to do with signage, but the building itself is not conducive to understand, allow you to understand where you are. You go up or down to the flights, the sign is down there. It should automatically, you should know where the planes are and where you're going and where people come out. It should tell you, the building should be telling you all this as a great gesture, the way your arms tell you where your hands are. It should be embracing you with the fundamental that every airport has a few things. It's not many. You buy a ticket, you get a bag, you go through security, you go to your gate.
You go, Pete.
That is not brain surgery, and no building is built that way to get you that. They're building it so they have a gracious, incredible roof. You come in and you look up and mobiles are hanging from the ceiling, or they have banners. So oh, see, why can't all our buildings be that? You still know where the fuck you are. No, it's just not, it doesn't come in at the first level. It's not the first thing you're trying to solve. Now I'll tell you what aisle is.
Okay.
It relates to this. I won't tell you. It's slightly boring, guys. You want to get up in the middle of it, walk out, just do. Because I'm bored a little bit by myself because I can't solve it. Seems like there's 5 issues, big ones. They don't embrace everything, but 5 big issues. Health, wealth, learning, conflict, and the environment. Seems like if I understand those things, I could run for any office or the head of any company. Seems if I understood those things, I could be a reporter writing for a newspaper, or on television doing a news program, or a citizen asking good questions of the people running for office or running to head Ford Motor Company or a school or a president of a university or anything. Now, that is not all the knowledge in the universe, those 5 subjects. I know that. But if you take it, it's a lot of stuff. Health and well-being and life and death and pain. That's a lot of our life. And getting that to happen and understanding it. And the understanding of curative medicine, preventative medicine. Then if we go to the second, wealth. Nobody knows if there should be a strong dollar or a weak dollar, why the interest rates go up and down. Or Bitcoin. Have you ever seen anything that's absurd? Let's say it works and takes over all the stuff in the world. It hardly matters to me if it works or it doesn't work. The thing is so absurd the way they explain it and how all of a sudden it's invented. The absurdity of it makes me not care. And we don't know anything about health, about wealth. Okay, then learning. Should we have a great educational system or a great learning system? Well, let's for argument's sake, you all are in a great educational system, but you certainly are not in a great learning system. Education is from the top down. We talked about this, and I peed on this a half an hour ago. I mean, if you talk about people, oh, we should have more schools, better schools, everybody should have computers, smaller classrooms, teachers being paid more money, and then they'll be really educated, and we'll get higher marks, grades, tests. We'll get higher tests that test what? Test things you're not interested in that you are going to memorize and forget short-term memory, like you play a game of gin rummy, and forget the next day. Where is the learning if learning is remembering what you're interested in? You weren't interested in it, you memorized it, you forgot about it, short-term memory, and then you do something else. That is not learning. So we have a great educational system, maybe, whatever that means, and no great learning system, and nobody is working on a great learning system. Nobody. Not having very great teachers go on the internet and teach to 7,000 people in a room around the world is not a great learning system. TED Talks is not a great learning system. Nova is not a great learning system in its way. Have we ever sat down and started saying, I want to run for governor of this state and I want to create a great learning system, not a great educational system? And we can't do that with the teachers' unions and with everybody else. I mean, that's not, you can't do it. You're dead on arrival. Next thing, conflict. It's hard to even talk about conflict. There's only 3 reasons for conflict. 2 seem to be the same, they're not. 1 is belief. Can't solve that. The second is greed, money. And the third is the empire. I should have a scientific or a mathematical way of proving that. But if you look at your thumb, just the last digit on your thumb, just that last digit, and then you look at a space that big, okay? The last digit of your thumb is the size of Bangladesh. That's the size of Russia. They have the same population. There is a deep-seated desire in Russia to have something that big, as England once had something that big, as America has wanted to expand and have things that people, the Russia now wants Crimea, or they want this or that, which is independent of greed, which is just more money. The Netherlands, which is about this, the size of this, probably has almost as much money as all of Russia. Africa, but the desert in Africa is as big as the United States of America. Its rainforest is as big as all of India. And now we still have more than half of the country to go. Africa is so big. We have no idea how big Africa is because we've never studied Africa. It's so big. We have no idea. So
do you think that we can get there? Is that part of the conceit of the project? Is that?
No, we're not going to get there. Let me finish my description. I'll tell you what I'm doing.
Okay.
The last thing is the environment, making that understandable relative to some of the things I've already said, but time. I won't dwell on that because it's more vast and I will leave you struggling with it. You know, all you have to know is that how stupid we are is that we have this marble in space where a quarter of it, less than a quarter of it is what we call as mountains and land. And 3/4 of it is water. And yet we don't name it for the 3/4, we call it Earth. God, if I had a marble, I'd sort of say, well, what dominates? I'll name the marble that, right? Better could they name it blue. That's what we see from space, isn't it? We see a blue marble. No, we name it Earth, dirt. We name it for the dirt, not for the water. That's how screwed up our whole head is about the world. And we would live for about 10 minutes without that water or what lives in it. But we'll do that some other time. Now, he asked me what my conceit was for the end of this project. My conceit at the end of the project is that I believe understanding precedes action. Somebody's running for mayor. Here's the dialogue. If you're a reporter, you say to the guy running for mayor, well, how many policemen are you going to hire? And the mayor says 150. That's how an election is run. Now you know that's just a metaphor for the question and answer of anything. How many public housing units you're going to put up? How many this or that you're going to do? What are you going to do about whatever? And they tell you something, but nobody asks you about making a city safe, or what makes up safety, or what is the relationship between 150 police and a safer city? Maybe it is more unsafe if you have more policemen. Is it maybe where the policemen are, or how they're trained, or geographically where they're located, or maybe it's not about that. Maybe it's about lighting the whole city. Maybe it's something else completely. What makes something safe? Now you might go through that whole exercise and come out that the only thing that makes a city safer is to hire 150 policemen. But nobody goes through that. They don't even get there. So the people asking the questions, the public and the reporters, and the person running for office answers it with a product, policemen being a product. Smaller classrooms being a preconception, higher pay meaning you get better people. I never noticed that higher pay gets you better people. I don't think you get better teachers by paying them more. So my whole thing is how to make something understandable without giving advice as to what to do. I want to take those 5 subjects, and whether I come up with 5 short 10-minute films, 1 big 50-minute film, 5 short pamphlets, a blog, a series of this, both, a poster, or whatever. I have no idea what the end product is, except that I'm going to come up with something where there is no advice given. It's not liberal, it's not conservative, it's not saying the word ever. You must, ought, have to. That's all we're told. Anybody, you watch on television, everybody says, here's what we must do. We have to do this. We ought to do this. Everybody's telling you the absolutes that never get done. Going back to that mayor, the mayor never will hire the 150 policemen, and they don't know anything about that anyway. The wall between the United States and Mexico is never going to be built. But whatever was promised by the person before Obama didn't happen either. Nothing happens like that because nobody talks about performance. My conceit is to make it understandable for myself, if it's understandable to me. This dumb guy who you were laughing at by saying how dumb he was. If I can understand it, some other people will, but I don't care if they do or they don't. That's how un-PC I am. I really don't care. I think solving the problem is the problem.
Yeah.
And that's all I care about.
I'm curious if any students have questions for Mr. Werman.
How could they have questions when I talk so absolutely? And I'm just going to embarrass them if they ask me a question. I'll take a question if you give me your social security number with the question. No, go ahead, ask me a question. If it's not a good question, I'll pass. You can ask me a personal question, and I might answer that, I might not. Go ahead. Do you have a good question? You're too intimidated. What a bunch of,
I see a hand. I see a hand.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask what interesting question.
Can't hear a word he's saying, so repeat it, somebody.
You talk a lot about interesting questions. I'm sure you have interesting questions for us. So I'm wondering what you want to know about us.
Do you have an interesting question about us?
Us in the plural, no, none. Personally, if I sat down with any one of you, I would have an interesting question about any one person to talk to them as a single human being, but not us. I don't really care about us or the plural, the you. I don't care. But I would have if I was there, I would sit and be happy to talk to you.
Is that a satisfactory answer?
Well, it's actually a very gracious answer.
Go ahead.
Yes.
What's one thing that's clear to you about life that's not clear to most people?
I do not understand the term most people.
Well,
No, I'm answering your question now. Do I get that time to answer your question? I don't use the term most people because I don't care about most people. The first part of your question, what is clear to me about life? Niels Bohr, who you might or might not ever have heard of, if you've ever taken a class in physics, he had a Nobel Prize in physics. He was from Denmark. He was a good friend of Einstein's, had very, very tense, his arguments and debates with Einstein were famous, although they remained friendly. And he was quite full of himself, a lot of hubris. He said at one point, this is paraphrasing, that when he had a profound idea, he realized the opposite was also profound. So in answer to your question, and in the beginning of the project I'm doing, the beginning of the book is, and I just added one word to it about a week ago, which I was very proud of. But up until a week ago, the beginning of the book was just about life and death. If you have death, you have life, and both of them are profound. The fact that life is profound, death is profound. I have about, 4 or 5 years. I'm going to be dead. I am living with that death, living, here's the opposite, living with that idea of death all the time, every day. I see just that teeny, it's lighting a match and it goes out. It's not lit very long. I'm living with death and yet functioning with this idea that I will be nothing. I don't believe in God. It's life and death. The other word I added to it, and Dan doesn't know this because I haven't talked to him since I thought it up, and it will seem like a non sequitur, if you know what that means, is pain and discomfort. That in the whole basic idea of health and well-being, in the middle of it is pain and discomfort. And it's something that generates from the very earliest of times, the idea of life and death and the idea of well-being, treatment, health. This was not a clear answer to your question, but it's as good as I can do at the moment.
Thank you. Any other questions? I asked Richard for an hour. Okay, yes.
So here's a kind of couple questions. Have you ever been in a situation in which you were paid to consult, but then they didn't allow us to do your work, and how did you handle
Well, wait, say that again because he mumbled the last part. He had his hand over his face.
Sorry. Have you ever been in a situation where you were paid for your work, but then they didn't allow us to do your work, and how do you handle that?
If I made an agreement, somebody paid me and they didn't want to use it, that's perfect. That's fine. That's up to them. I don't feel badly about that.
Has that
an
happened?
opportunity to think about things. I did a very interesting thing with Nigel Holmes. You probably know of Nigel. Certainly Dan does. A whole big thing that was really good. We both thought were very good. A whole big scheme for CVS of new drug bottles, new ways of setting up their store, a whole thing, a complete information architecture and everything. And I was paid. And at that time, they were going through many changes, and they didn't use it. And about a year, the person I was dealing with actually became president. More reason for me to be back in. She was happy with it, but they got to be so big that they made a very good choice to go with very big firms to take over. I mean, they're on the Fortune 200 list. They couldn't work with me. I don't have an office. I don't have anything. It was a zero thing. I don't feel badly. I got to think about how I would do a place for a drugstore, so to speak, but a new name for what it actually is. And I really think there should be so many things there are. Everything is directed towards getting drugs in the back, but also everything is directed towards impulse buying of things. And low-level healthcare now, of blood pressure, blood tests, and things of that sort. It's going to be a mini version of an ER, and it's going to be getting information about healthcare, getting your vaccinations and that low level of rote things. But by the way, this is more than you want to know, but I'll tell you. Low level of that we're part of getting trained as a pharmacist. You have to know how to give vaccinations and injections. And part of it is just meeting other people there. Sometimes they have a huge audience that comes in there, but the ability to sit around and have a cup of coffee and then do impulse buying because you want to keep them in the store. And there's always a significant minimal 15-minute wait before you pick up your drugs. We're always waiting. Just sit over there and wait, right? So I thought they should also have their own small coffee shop. And I was trying to put something together with Lilly, who I knew Mr. Lilly of that company in Europe that makes very good coffee. A coffee shop, this little medical thing, new bottles, and information. Because I had done 8 books on healthcare. So I thought it was a very good presentation, but I wasn't somebody they could deal with. And I'm sure eventually there are people I couldn't deal with because they're just out of my league, too big. And I got the pleasure of figuring that all out. Figuring out, I don't care about doing it if I can really figure out something. I told this, I guess the young lady in front who asked me a question when she said, most people, I don't really care about most people. I wasn't figuring out to make a better service for CBS or to help people. I was figuring out to solve the problem. I solved the problem.
Was it in part because you were embarrassed about buying your fancy face cream?
No, I just use that as an example that there's many things in this world that aren't for men. And the same thing, and I deal with Tony Chen, and one of the companies Tony's group owns is a place that does facials and nails and things like that. And I said, it's directed at women and half the market could be men who want to have their nails done and pedicures. And they should really put a great emphasis on that, not make it an embarrassing place for men, because at this moment, it's embarrassing for men to do things like that. It's embarrassing for men to buy face cream because there's nothing for men really basically in the store. And if you want to buy something, I ask my wife what I should buy that has retin A in it, so it gets rid of my lines so I look like a child.
It's working.
Thank you. I think that answers your question. I hope that answers your question.
I answered it.
But I don't mind that at all. I don't find any downside if somebody pays me for it. And if they don't pay me for it, but it was a good problem, I spent some time solving it. Well, God, what else am I going to do? What else am I doing in this world except trying to think up ideas? And the gift was being asked. But how I'm different than most people is I think up ideas, not because people ask me to do them, but I think up ideas that I just want to do and do it. I once wanted to make that point at an AIGA meeting, and that's when I quit the AIGA the first time, and saying that basically everybody was a whore waiting for a client. I guess that wasn't the nicest way to put it, but they were waiting for somebody to ask them to do things when they could generate ideas and do them themselves. Access guides, I generated myself and did myself. The TED conference, I did myself. Nobody asked me to do that. There was nobody on the board. I've done about 90 books. Nobody's ever asked me to do one. I did the best-selling book on the Olympics because I wanted to do it. I didn't have a client. So everybody sits on their ass saying, well, they can't get work. Oh, yeah? Make up something you want to do. But that's too scary for people. That's okay. I am not, if everybody was like me, I'd have no work. I'm not trying to get everybody out there thinking of it. And you fail a lot. I mean, half the things I do, I fail. Well, it's hard to live with failure, you know. It is hard to live with failure. But you're going to fail. Read Dr. Seuss a lot.
Any last questions from the audience before we let you go? Before we let Mr. Worman go? Thank you for giving us your time today.
Well, I'll ask them a question.
Okay.
What did I not answer, or what was not your preconception of how well or how badly you thought I am, or where you think I'm a fool, or how egomaniacal you think I am, by the way I'm talking, or am I past the point of being egomaniacal? I'm so egomaniacal that I'm abrasively charming to you.
The latter.
Does anybody think you should work harder on it?
What, being abrasive?
Yeah. Is there a way to go? It's a path, not a point, right?
Well, you know, if I wasn't abrasive and to the point, I would have only said about a third of what I said already. I'd have to make nice through every sentence. Remember I said in the beginning, you can answer most questions yes or no?
Yes.
By the way,
Thank you for not dragging us through that shit.
in Dan, you are fortunate. He has grown on me. In the beginning, I thought he was just sort of a dilettante. He was annoying.
It's true.
I told you this, Dan. I mean, this is not embarrassing, Dan. But he has now gotten more and more, even though I have some bones to pick with how he talk. I was very interesting hearing you talk for about 40 minutes about me. I mean, seldom do you get a chance to do that. And I heard what you people thought of me. And I think I can understand you saying everything you said. I'm not offended by anything anybody said.
I'm glad that you got to hear that.
Yes, it was. It was a very interesting gift. But Dan is, he's trying to make a living, and he has this idea of this company, and it's derivative in many ways from what I at one point had started and wanted to do, and then thought, why do I want to run a company or have employees? I mean, I once, as Dan knows, had 70 employees doing that in San Francisco. But Dan is, I think, understands this really in a more academic way than I do, and sometimes a more coherent and clear way than I talk about it, because I'm so caught up with my own kind of crudeness. And that he's much more elegant about it, and I think you're fortunate to have him as a faculty person.
Thank you for saying that, Richard. I
Well,
feel very fortunate to have you as a friend.
I've never said that at the end of a speech.
No, thank you.
Okay.
I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Why don't we take a little break?
Dan, you can stay there for a minute. I'll talk to you for a minute.
Yeah, I'll stay here.